Hi, my name is Nico Nexus, and I have played Subspace a lot. I made a very old Subspace guide that is completely outdated and also aged pretty badly, considering that Subspace has changed a ton since his old days. As a person who has played Subspace a ton in the competitive scene, I think the guide would be extremely helpful for not only newcomers, but also Subspace players already playing him. Just a quick warning, this will also be focusing more on the perspective of a competitive player as opposed to casual. I will also expect people to kind of know what his abilities do sort of, and to be completely honest, his abilities aren't complex much, but I will list the important things about them, albeit briefly. Before I do go into this guide however, let me say a few things. Playing Sub is not always going to be consistent. You will always struggle since he is a support character. Even though Subspace is considered one of the easiest characters, there are still some nuances to playing as him, so don't feel like you did nothing every match or so. And obviously, try to have fun playing Subspace. Subspace is a support fighter that holds the role of a tank buster by applying vulnerability and poison to targets to not only chip them down, but make targets way easier to kill thanks to vulnerability amplifying teammates' damage on targets. Despite being a support, he also boasts a passive that helps him heal by getting kills and assists combined with abilities that can help him have some type of self-defense and mobility when used right. Since he is a support, he excels when his team can help follow up on his benefits, as Subspace's entire plan and self-sustain is dependent on his team members. Because of this, Subspace works a lot in the back lines as he applies debuffs from afar and tries to live against a barrage of dive and range characters that will constantly find ways to mess him up, or usually kill him due to not being able to win without his team a lot of the time, especially since he doesn't have any shield to depend upon. Before we talk about the moves and passive, we need to cover what vulnerability and poison are. Poison is a status ailment that does 1 damage each stack in 0.1 second intervals, making it a very fast damage source if stacked. This damage source is exclusive to Subspace only, which makes him hold a very vital damage source. When an enemy reaches 15 HP however, they will lose their poison stacks so they don't immediately die. Vulnerability however is much more impactful. Aside from Mistwalk, all of Sub's abilities apply vulnerability in percentage amounts. The percentage of vulnerability a target has, the more damage they take, which is indicated from a pink damage number a target takes. The vulnerability caps at 30% and lasts 8 seconds, with any application of extra vulnerability refreshing this 8-second timer. These status effects are vastly important, as only Subspace is able to apply them consistently, so keep all of these in mind. Subspace's passive is very self-explanatory. For any kill or assist, you get 50 health back. This gives an incentive for Sub to pressure many enemies. He can get assists and kills incredibly easy as long as his team follows up, and combining this passive with healers, Subspace can keep his bulk up and keep himself healthy thanks to the passive. The trip mines travel a maximum of 100 studs, and on direct, does 20 damage with 10 poison damage ticks along with applying 5% vulnerability. Directs also have a small AoE hitbox that does 8 damage with 8 poison ticks. The mines that appear do 10 damage with 20 poison ticks per mine, along with 10% vulnerability for every mine. If activated manually with R, the mines increase to 20 damage with 20 poison ticks. This is your main tool for dismantling targets, as the easy access to vuln, poison, and overall chip damage is incredibly easy and simple to use. Mines can also be used to cover entryways or stacked onto choke points to stagger the enemy with mines, as on maps like S-Fall for Bowling Alley, it helps mines cover up entryways onto a point just for an extra layer of safety to catch opponents off guard. These mines can also be spread out on a point or even stacked onto specific spots to catch an enemy off guard, but mine stacks do require some coordination and smart positioning. Other than that, you really need to get used to the fire rate of Subs M1, as direct hits will be what you will mostly be going for outside of setting mines up around a point. You can also just spam R if your mines weren't activated yet to reposition your mines, or to try and unload crazy chip damage onto the enemy, as the auto activation range of the mines is insanely small. The initial hit of the star does 20 damage and applies 10% vulnerability to everyone hit by it. The recast of the star does an extra 20 damage and applies an extra 5% vulnerability, along with 20% slow for 3 seconds, and grounded based on how much the target levitated in the air with a flat second added. Fallen Star can be used as not only an extra chip damage tool, but also as a self-defense tool against divers or anyone on you. Thanks to its minimum 0.5 second cast time, its M2 can come out incredibly fast and be able to get dive characters away from you for some time. And if they get caught in the M2 hit, you can recast it to send them down as you stay in the air. Just be aware of how much HP you have, as the vulnerability and damage can somewhat kill you. It can also be used to maintain your point presence, as the levitation usually makes you harder to hit and is very unpredictable a lot of the time. You can also use it with Subspace's ult for safer preparation, but it's not heavily needed. Outside of self-defense, Fallen Star can be used as a tool for extra chip damage on targets and disorienting them due to the levitating and slam down. This is especially good against the tanks in general. It can help your range threats hit targets easier, albeit it depends due to the slam down that can screw up their aim a bit. The projectile, when hit, does 20 damage with a 20 poison tick damage, but it creates a gas cloud that does 4 damage a second. The initial hit also applies 5% vulnerability, while the cloud applies 8% vulnerability and slow every second, with the slow capping out at 25%. Comet Carnage is almost like a pipe bomb in Subspace's kit. Using this immediately puts a lot of pressure on any one hit, which especially applies to tanks like Banhammer and Katana. Due to its long cooldown, its main use is as an immediate pressure tool on anyone you hit it with. Tanks like Katana are more niche threats like a Biograph and Overdrive and whatnot. Just be mindful of the projectile's arc it takes, and especially its 16-second cooldown being a monumental amount of time to wait. Because of this, you mainly look for usage with the direct hit and the gas cloud in tandem, as both are extremely helpful to use. Subspace turns into a bunch of mist and immediately gains speed and 25% bounce for 1.5 seconds. During its windup, Subspace does a small slam that does 36 damage, while his dash in the mist does 10 damage with a 20 poison tick damage for every person he connects with. Easily Subspace's most effective escape option. The mist and push force allow you to get away from any situation. The cast can be good if a bio is on you, as the cast hit is client-sided, which can make it catch dives or anyone else off guard due to its awkward hitbox. The mist itself isn't good for damage unless you're close to someone, so you could probably run to someone and then back out to immediately reposition yourself. Due to its long 14-second cooldown, this tool needs to be used when M2 won't work or if you are cycling your escape options well enough, as it's a vital tool and helps Subspace out of almost anything. It also helps cancel knockback and other push forces, which is very neat. On a few maps, this move can be used in rollouts to get the point quicker. This is mainly apparent on Bandland, Bowling Alley, First Point on Shooting Teapot Observatory, and more. Also, if you time your E just right, you can override stuns like Skateboard's finisher or Vinestaff's root while being able to move as well, but not jumping. So that's a pretty neat side effect too. Subspace spawns a crystal over him that creates a vacuum which sucks in nearby enemies in a 20 stud range. Every second in the vacuum, it does 6 damage and applies 5% vulnerability, while the explosion does 20 damage and applies 15% vulnerability to everyone in the explosion. Noxious Void depends heavily on placement. This could be one of the best ults in the entire game and can even be a win con at points. At worst, it can cover the conquer point and hinder the enemy's control of the point. There will be an ideal Noxious Void spawn on some maps, but as long as you can keep covering a conquer point or even surprise the enemy with a great sub-ult to lock them in place, you did your job with blocking areas off and even getting enemies stuck in it. Just please be mindful of when you use it, because if you die while your ult is used, the entire thing will cancel. Subspace is a support character. This is important because he has no shield and won't get HP regeneration on kills, rather relying on his passive for actual self-sustain. Because of this, you need to be extremely careful where you're positioned. Any aggressive dive or flanker character can completely rip through your health bar, so you have to make sure where you're at all times. Try to set up mines when your team is in downtime. This is apparent on maps like Bowling Alley and Bandland, where after the entire enemy team dies, setting up mines is honestly the only thing you can really do, and don't try to be reckless unless you know what you're doing. It's also to be mindful that the mines exploding ignore line of sight checks, so the mine explosions can actually hit through walls, which is pretty neat. Also, the manual reload of the mines create a bigger explosion, so there is always an incentive to manual reloads. As Subspace, you primarily focus on the tanky threats like Katana, Banhammer, and Sword to an extent. This can apply to other supports like Vinestaff and Medkit, but the tank are always the #1 threat. Outside of the tanks, Try to apply vulnerability and chip damage to anyone that might be a big threat around you, but the tanks are the #1 threat, especially Banhammer. Please be aware of when you use M2 and E at Subspace. Without these tools, Subspace is completely weak to any dive character and will effectively have no mobility to defend himself outside of his teammates. M2 has the faster cooldown, but it has the drawback of levitating and also chipping your own health, while E is much safer and more reliable, but has an incredibly long cooldown, so repositioning with it is your main goal, don't just randomly use it. Always try to get a good cycle when you ult. Due to how valuable Noxious Void is, getting a consistent cycle with this ult is important. A cycle is kind of like timings for when you use your ult, and cycles change from character to character, sometimes not even having cycles. My usual cycle for sub-ults is usually the first run around 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the second one near a minute, and the third one possibly around near the end of the game to try and hold a point for overtime, or to wait to use ult for when overtime hits if we are behind. And obviously, be careful when using it, as losing your ult can be fatal. If you want to try and minimize the chances you get shut down, be aware of fighters around you and use M2 before ult to get the levitation effect, as it can be good to get melee fighters off of you. Oh, and this mainly applies to Conquer, but just try to stay on point. This is more of a general thing, but I need to say it, man. Conquer, Subspace's favorite game mode. Subspace is undeniably an amazing pick for Conquer. In a game mode with lots of tanks, healers, and bulky targets, Subspace slots in very nicely as not only a tank buster, but someone who could pressure anyone with vulnerability and poison. He usually sits around the middle and backlines of a team, applying Vuln from a distance and saving his M2 and E just as escape options if anyone tries to approach him up close. That being said, Subspace can potentially have issues with dive-centered characters. While his M2 and E help a lot of his matchups close up and as escape tools, characters like Biograph, Sword, or Rocket can prove to be a problematic matchup as Sub has no reliable way to outdamage them or get away if he didn't save his mobility skills enough. Despite these downsides against divers, Subspace is undeniably one of the most defining Conquer characters in the game. Subspace generally works on almost every single Conquer comp, even healerless comps. He obviously works best with more traditional comps having a healer and tank, as he can allow his tank to shred through enemies and win the tank 1v1s much easier, while healers make him much more consistently able to stay alive. He can also have the assistance of a sword for defense, or any ranged character for extra tank busting and defense if needed. He really just works everywhere if you need to slot in a reliable tank killer, just make sure Subspace doesn't get overrun by dive characters. While Sub is a very ideal character in Conquer, Sub is incredibly situational on Annihilate. In a mode that prioritizes kills and deaths among lots of dive characters, Subspace really stands out like a sore thumb. His entire kit relying on being in the backline and also struggling with the more aggressive characters and playstyles on Annihilate really highlight his flaws against dive. In fact, Sub is often considered one of the worst characters on Annihilate and is usually not thought of for an actual pick. Despite this, Sub does have a few uses. His poison and vulnerability debuffs are insanely effective, pairing greatly well with most of the ranged characters you'll see in Annihilate, and this often also makes him a solid poke option on maps. Q is an incredible tool to use to force dives off of you, or put tons of damage on certain targets to force them back. His mobility tools with M2 and E are also still as effective as ever. M2 can disrupt dives and often help Sub a ton with his mobility to escape dives as usual, and E is always such a reliable option to get out of situations. Not only that, his mines can be decent at covering and trapping common fighting areas to make rushes a bit more dangerous from the enemy, as mine damage can slowly add up along with vulnerability. Subspace ult is also surprisingly good as a defensive option. If the enemy tries to rush in with their own ults, Sub's ult can block off several pathways onto your team or just act as a defensive black hole to stall out ult timers, as if anyone gets sucked in, it pretty much becomes an instant point for your team. It can also be used offensively for your team, as you can catch people backing up into it, or just as a way to control the areas the enemy could go, especially on a map like Chaos Canyon. Not only that, Subspace can operate defensively and offensively pretty well. His mines act as ways to just weaken an opponent for your team, or to weaken enemy rushes, and an aggressive Subspace with his team can be terrifying, as that vulnerability and poison is surprisingly scary to fight against, so you need to be aware if the enemy has a Subspace. Despite all of this, using Subspace requires caution. as a lot of common characters can make some issues for Subspace, as he usually relies a lot on M2 and smart positioning to not get completely caught off guard every time. And since he is a support, he has no natural health regeneration outside of assist and kills, which is insanely problematic for a mode like Annihilate where he has no shield and usually needs to rely heavily on a healer to keep him healthy. This could cause some teams to really feel rigid running Subspace, along with the fact you can free his slot up with another offensive fighter that could poke from afar and still hold their own up front. Overall, while Subspace seems too situational and Annihilate to use effectively, Subspace has surprisingly decent uses that could kinda work. You just need smart game sense and positioning to use him very well. But when used well, he can be a big nuisance and makes his ranged teammates more of a nightmare to deal with. For Annihilate, all you really need is ranged and a healer. Anti-healers like Medkit and Coil help a ton, as Subspace's self-sustain is much harder to achieve in this mode. And obviously, ranged threats like Rocket and Slingshot appreciate doing extra damage to targets from afar, as he can control maps like Laundromat and Bandland effectively to keep Subspace away from danger. And obviously, since Subspace can surprisingly have decent poking tools, Skateboard and Biograph can always appreciate the chip damage Sub can bring to a team. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about Escort. Honestly, just take what I said in the Conqueror section, except Sub is worse than Escort because of bigger maps and stuff. He can lock up the cart even better with his ult, but other than that, nothing really changes except the pain of long rollouts Subspace has to go for. So, yeah. While Sub works on a lot of maps, I feel it's best to just give a general idea of what Sub's best maps are, as there are a lot. Some special highlights include Shooting Teapot Observatory, ROBLOX Mall, and Iron Cafe. Subspace usually works on maps that value melee fighters a lot, or maps that can take advantage of his area denial the best. While a lot of Conquer maps favor Subspace, some maps like Space Knights are honestly pretty bad due to being wide open and filled with range threats, something Sub is not a big fan of. While Subspace is considered a huge threat due to his vulnerability and able to make any enemy much more squishy, Subspace is still a support character, and like other supports, he doesn't have much matchups he can really win. In this chart, you can see how hard Subspace's matchups can be, so I'll go through all of them in fighter order. Hey, so like most of the 1v1s I did were on Darkheart's Revenge, and honestly on a flat map, all the matchups become way harder for Subspace, so sorry about the footage. While Sword has a high value as a target, Sword can sometimes be problematic for Subspace as he has enough mobility to rush you down and try to lock you up. Fortunately for Subspace, M2 and E help him get away more consistently, and Sword without his mobility can't do much to Subspace at all. Sword's empowered moves can be hugely problematic though, especially empowered E, which can lock Subspace into taking a guaranteed 100 damage. Not a hard matchup, but definitely very annoying for Subspace. He is a fast character that can burst you down quickly. Since Skate has immense burst damage, he can pull up on you and melt half of your HP in seconds. The best thing Subspace has against Skateboard is attempting a D-board with M2, which is difficult, or fooling Skate with a Mind Stack, which has its own challenges since you could potentially blow yourself or a teammate up if done wrong. Not a bad matchup as Sub can still escape, but a very harsh one. Biograph is by far one of Subspace's worst matchups. Oftentimes he could dive you consistently and never leave you alone. The best you can do against Biograph is catching him and yourself in an M2 to stall out your death, or hitting an E to either force him away or get out of his sights. Surprisingly, Subspace can somewhat deal with a Biograph in Overdrive, as a client side E hitbox can completely mess him up bulk wise, or a well timed Q forces him to cancel it, but other than that, yeah, you really aren't winning this one. Katana can't really do anything against you. While he can grapple you, you have E to immediately get out of it and can just abuse cover to spam mines and Q on Katana to melt him slowly. Probably one of the more lopsided matchups in the game. Banhammer is the same as Katana, however the main difference is that he can effectively dive you. This is, however, still a good matchup for Subspace, by the fact that M2 and E are great ways to avoid Banhammer preemptively or if he is right on you, unless he has Judgment. Other than that, pretty easy matchup for Subspace. As the other tank buster and a character with high damage, Rocket makes quick work of you. You can annoy Rocket by chipping his shield consistently or forcing him away because he heavily relies on shield, but other than that, you just get approached and shot down a lot of the time. While Sling may seem scary on the surface, he really does not like taking mind damage at all. Yes, he can still beat you and outdamage you often, but he can't necessarily dive in to get you like Rocket can, which makes him screwed over by cover often. Slingshot also just hates getting vulnerability since he is rather squishy and a high value range target to kill since he is just so good. Not a matchup in your favor, but you can really force him out. There is a very low chance you run into this matchup, but in the event that you do, Hyper Laser usually wins. While Hyper is a slow target and gets vulnerability and poison stacked to hell, Hyper Laser has some of the highest damage output in the entire game. So even up close, Sub can struggle as one shot from Hyper Laser can melt a good amount of Subspace's health. And if the battle is from long or even mid range, yeah, Hyper just makes quick work of you. Otherwise, Hyper doesn't seem to target you much and you can absolutely chip the hell out of him, so it's not terrible. Shuriken depends if he can actually ambush you successfully. A Shuriken that is able to ambush you basically beats you most of the time, but if he fails to ambush, which happens more often than not, he is in deep waters. A Shuriken that loses his passive is often a dead Shuriken that is forced to run away, and Sub Q usually causes him to leave you alone. Even Sub's mines can be very bad for Shuriken, as he is often just too squishy to really risk anything, and at best, he usually needs to trade to kill a few. It's a weird matchup, but Subspace and Shuriken are mainly on equal footing due to how much is based off the ambush of the Shuriken. Scythe's edge in the matchup is mainly due to her tricky movement. Since she moves much differently compared to the rest of the fighters, Scythe can often avoid your mines and just keep on hitting tipper M1s to decimate your health. It's basically like Sword except just a little bit harder. Medkit does hate your poison and vulnerability, but usually a good Medkit is able to defeat a good Subspace. Thanks to Medkit's passive, he can often sustain himself better than Subspace at any vulnerability he has on him. He can use E to cleanse it all away anyways. Again, Medkit still struggles because Sub and Medkit can often match each other in damage, but Medkit's self-sustain gives him a slight edge. He can rush you down and never leave you alone. M2 and E can often be enough to get away from Boombox, but if he stays on you, you will be constantly pulled back and slowly melted because Boombox never leaves you alone. There's ways to minimize the matchup like forcing him out with vulnerability, but Boombox usually just defeats you. Vine Staff is basically the Medkit matchup if he had overall worse damage and no cleanse. Vine Staff can get vulnerability and poison stacked a ton, which causes her to usually die quicker than Subspace could. The only way Sub could lose this matchup is if Vine can hit direct E's consistently, but that's usually not going to happen, and thus, Vine usually loses this matchup. So Coil's mobility makes him near impossible to hit, and even if you try to use M2 defensively, he can go right back to pummeling you. Your best bet is to use E and hope he doesn't notice you since his mobility is too unpredictable and his burst damage is too much for you to handle. So honestly, Coil is the one unwinnable matchup Subspace has. You just need to run away. Now, this might all sound bad for Subspace, but you need to remember, Subspace has a team he falls back on while the enemy has a team they can fall back on. While Subspace can't excel in these single matchups by himself, his teammates will love to pile onto a target with vulnerability and a chipped health bar by any means. And well, he can always fall back safely and let his team excel at bursting out the targets he has successfully debuffed. 1v1 matchups will never be Subspace's strong suit, but that's okay when his team's job becomes much easier. Overall, Subspace is a very simple character that can be easy to understand, but surprisingly fun to use in the right hands. At his best, Subspace is insanely annoying to fight against and makes the enemy team constantly struggle to stay alive even with all the healing in the world. It can make any rushes or defensive plays much harder to pull off. Subspace is also a character that rewards good game sense and ability management as well as rewarding your team with much easier access to damage. Subspace might seem scary as you will constantly get targeted down and how much value you get could always shift during matches, especially with point presence on the conquer point, but trust me when I say this, you will be a huge advantage to any team comp unless it's Annihilate, which is almost like a test to your game sense and positioning as Subspace. Either way, whether if you drop Subspace or continue to play him, what really matters is the value and fun you have. I hope this video can help people try out Subspace in opens or scrims, and give him a try for really anything this game offers. And of course, thanks to everyone who helped with this video, and a huge thanks to all the submains I asked for help with in some part of the process. As always, thanks to you for watching. And even if it seems like you're bad at Subspace, just remember, it's always up from here, and practice takes time.